In this video, we will be covering some of the most important checkmate themes that can help you master your finishing technique in attacks. So without any further ado, let's get started. Number 1 on our list is the kill box mate. So in this position, white has created a sort of box around the black king, and all he has to do is deliver the checkmate with rook f8. The queen is covering these important squares and supporting the rook as well, while the rook covers the square and delivers the checkmate. So you can see this kind of a box that we have made. This is why this is known as the kill box checkmate. Quite a common theme when you have a queen and rook attacking, and it's also used in the railroad mate. Then we have the lawnmower mate, which is a very important checkmate, also known as a basic checkmate. So we play rook b6 check. The king has to move as it is cut off on one side by this rook. And the check is given on this rook, so it has to move behind somewhere. King g7, rook a7 check. Again, they have to move to the 8th rank, and now it's a checkmate. This is also a very important checkmate to know when you have only 2 rooks and your opponent has a king. And I have covered this in my basic checkmates video, so you can check that out here as well. The next checkmate is kind of an opening trap, which is important to know so that you don't fall into it, is known as the legal's mate. It happens after e4, e5, knight f3, d6, which is known as the Philidor defense. We play bishop c4, knight c6, knight c3, very standard development. And now if your opponent here plays bishop g4, then you have the opportunity to play h3. Now after h3, they can either capture on f3 or go to e6, but that wouldn't be very much in alignment with the plan of playing bishop g4 in the first place. So the very natural response is to go to h5. And because he played bishop h5 and the bishop is undefended, we can take advantage of this fact and play knight takes e5. Now the problem is, if they think, oh wow, he blundered his queen, let's take it, then you can give them a mighty Uno reverse and play bishop f7 check. The only move is king e7, and now knight d5 is a checkmate with the bishop covering these squares. This knight covers this square and protects the bishop, while this knight gives the check and defends this square, and obviously the king is restricted by his own pieces as well. So this is an important opening trap to know. There are a few variations. He doesn't have to take bishop into d1, which is the checkmate variation. They can also play knight into e5 with the idea that after queen h5 they can take knight takes c4, thinking that they are now a piece up, but in fact we can play queen b5 check. They block with their queen, and now queen takes c4. So you can see that the queen has just captured the knight. Black's pieces are passive, white is a pawn up. This is not as good compared to the checkmate variation, but definitely something worth getting in the opening itself. So this was the legal's mate. The lolly's mate. In this type of checkmate, white has his queen inside the opponent's fianchetto structure, which is basically keeping the pawns like this, and he has a friendly pawn which supports the queen in delivering the checkmate like this. This is quite a useful checkmate to know when you are attacking in positions where the bishop has been traded, as in this case, and the queen and pawn are on these squares, so you can formulate some checkmate ideas like this as well. The max Lange mate. Now many of you may be already aware of the max Lange opening, but there is also a checkmate theme named after the famous player. This checkmate theme involves the use of the bishop and queen to create a sort of dancing maneuver in order to deliver the checkmate. It only occurs when black has a color complex weakness, as in this case, where all his pawns are on dark squares, therefore his white squares are really weak, and to our benefit we have a queen and a light square bishop, both of which can control this color complex. The mate goes like queen e8 check, king h7, bishop g8, king h8, bishop f7, covering the g6 escape square, so that after king g7, both bishop g6 and queen g8 are checkmates. Then we have Maillet's mate, which is very similar to the opera mate, except in this case the mate happens only when the bishop is supporting the rook and not controlling any square in front of the king, such as rook d8 mate over here. The Morphy mate is a checkmate which involves the rooks cutting off of the enemy king while the bishop delivers the final checkmate. So as you can see, the king is cut off by the rook and the bishop delivers the final checkmate. The opera mate, as I had mentioned earlier, involves the similar kind of pattern where a bishop is being supported by a rook, except that the bishop also controls this square in front of the king along with supporting the rook on d8 as well. So rook d8 is a beautiful checkmate. Pillsbury's mate. This mate occurs in the opposite fashion of Morphy's mate, meaning this time the bishop will be the one cutting off and the rook will be the one giving the checkmate. So in this kind of position, if you move your rook somewhere here hoping that it will be a checkmate, the problem is he can play c3 and now the attack has been blocked. Instead, what you can do in these positions is sacrifice the rook on rook g8 check. Since it's a double check, he'll have to take with the king, and now rook g1 is a checkmate as the bishop cuts off on this diagonal and the rook delivers the final checkmate. Then we have the railroad mate, which is a combination of the triangle mate and the kill box mate. So what we do is we have the queen and the rook separated by one file on which the opponent king is, and we give check as if a train is moving on a rail. So rook h3, king g4, queen f3, king g5, rook h5, king g6, queen f5, king g7, rook h7, king g8, and now queen f7 mate. Retty's mate. In this kind of checkmate, the bishop and the rook combine their strength to create a sort of checkmate which involves a double check. So the king can either go to e8 when it will be checkmated in the opera mate fashion, or it can go to c7 when its own pieces will be the cause for its demise after bishop d8 checkmate. This mate also showcases the x-ray ability of all long range pieces such as the bishop, as the bishop is giving check but also indirectly controlling this square, thus preventing the king to escape from here. Then we have another common opening checkmate at the beginner level, which is the scholar's mate. This is important to know, and I'll also tell you how you can avoid falling inside this trap. It happens after e4, e5, queen h5. So the e5 pawn is attacked, so many players defend with knight c6. And after bishop c4, it is quite a normal temptation to want to kick out the queen with knight f6. But unfortunately, this leads to the checkmate with queen into f7 checkmate. The better approach here would be to play g6, and now they can try queen f3, again threatening a checkmate. Now you can either play queen f6 or even knight f6 as I prefer. And the prematurely developed queen will come under some serious fire after something like bishop g7, d6, bishop g4, when this queen will be severely annoyed. Smothered mate. This is probably the most aesthetic checkmate of them all, as it involves the sacrifice of the queen and the lone knight delivers the checkmate, showcasing its ability to jump over other pieces and control squares indirectly. It happens after knight h6 check, so the king is being double checked, so it has to move to h8. And now we play the beautiful move queen g8 check. The point is, it is supported by the knight, so the rook will have to capture, and now as you can see, the king is smothered in by his own pieces, and now we can simply play knight f7, which is a beautiful checkmate. Then there is the suffocation mate, which occurs when the bishop is again cutting off the king along this diagonal. The rook and pawns obstruct the king as well, and we can just play checkmate after knight h6 when the king has no squares to go to. The swallow's tail mate. So in this type of checkmate, the ending formation looks like the tail of a swallow. That is why the name is given as such. It happens when the king is being blocked in by its own pieces on the diagonal escape routes, and the queen is giving check directly in front of the king, covering these squares as well, and also indirectly covering the g5 square while being supported by a friendly piece, which doesn't have to be a pawn, it can be anything. So this is known as the swallow's tail mate. The triangle mate. So as we had seen in the railroad mate, the triangle mate is an important concept that was used both in the railroad mate and in the kill box checkmate. What happens is the rook and queen are defending each other. Now the queen will come here to give checkmate, and this pawn will obstruct his own king, thus it will lead a checkmate after queen f5 mate. And finally we have Vukovic's mate, which is a very rare mating theme but can be of important use if your opponent has extra material but you have active pieces. So it occurs with the use of three pieces, namely the rook, knight and pawn. The knight covers these two squares in front of the king. The pawn supports the rook in checkmating the king, and the rook covers these two squares along the rank. So rook d7 is a beautiful checkmate. This can occur if your opponent has surplus material but has underestimated your attacking ability with the knight, rook and the pawn. Well, that's it for today, friends. Please make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep making content like this. And don't forget to check out part 1 of this series, where I cover 18 more checkmate concepts for you to further master your understanding of these concepts and help you finish off your opponent like a pro. Till then, I will see you in the next video. Bye.